I would like to further explore the gray area beneath the creation of a digital monthly fan art zine. Fan art as a whole is stabbing at the heart of derivative works versus transformative uses, with the added complication of a limited commercial context. Fan art is defined as artwork based on popular works of fiction, such as books, movies, etc., that is created by fans. Zines are mostly commonly a small circulation publication of an original or appropriated text and images. More broadly, the term encompasses any self-published unique work of minority interest. Regarding derivative works discussed on the last slide, Warner Bros. Entertainment Inc. versus RDR Books. In this case, characters can be granted copyright protection, as can many other non-expression elements of the original work, even if the artist, or in that case, author, does so in a creative way, but are still using the original expressions and characters. The defendant, in his case, the work was not transformative, but rather a rearranging of facts and original characters in J.K. Rowling's original Harry Potter books. There was way too much against him, as all of his copied works, a lot of them direct quotes from the book, went against J.K. Rowling's wishes, as she wanted to make the encyclopedia herself rather than using RDR Books' lexicon, as the copyrighted characters were used without her outright permission. In the next case, Salinger versus Colting, although this is another literary case rather than an art-dependent one, the defendant, Colting, created a derivative, but not blatantly so, written sequel, the well-known book, The Catcher in the Rye. The defendant argued that there were significant differences between the books and that he did not intend his to be a sequel to Catcher in the Rye. Rather, he argued that it was a commentary and critique that reflected on aspects of Salinger's original novel, such as Salinger's relationship as author to the book and to the Caulfield character. Salinger won the case, as Colting's defense was that his work was a critique rather than just a fighting, fair use book, when his work was an outright derivative masked behind a facade of parody. In this slide specifically, we're going to take an in-depth look at Paramount Pictures Corporation, who are the plaintiffs, versus Axnar Productions Inc., who are the defendants here. This is an action for copyright infringement arising out of the defendant's unauthorized exploitation of Star Trek, one of the most successful entertainment franchises. Plaintiffs own the copyrights in this treasured franchise, absolutely. The defendants have made a short film entitled Star Trek Prelude to Axnar, and are in the process of producing a film called Axnar, the Motion Picture. Collectively, the Axnar works infringe the plaintiffs' works by using innumerable copyright elements of Star Trek, including its settings, characters, species, and themes. The Axnar works are intended to be professional quality productions, but the defendants' own admission unabashedly take Paramount and CBS's intellectual property. They aim to look and feel like a true Star Trek movie. On information belief, defendants have raised over $1 million so far to produce these works, including building a studio, hiring actors, set designer, costume designers, the whole 9 yards. They did this all from crowdfunding. I don't think intentionally this was supposed to be the case, but it ended up being the case, as the Star Trek franchise do have a large fan base. On information and belief, the defendants did incorporate numerous elements of the Star Trek copyrighted works into the Axnar screenplay and their Vulcan scenes. The Axnar works are substantially similar to the Star Trek copyrighted works. They're substantially similar to Star Trek copyrighted works, so much that they had about 15 to 17, if not more, in-depth within the court case similarities across the generations of Star Trek movies, shows, shorts, interviews, etc. On information and belief, in direct violation of the plaintiff's exclusive rights, defendants have directly infringed, and unless enjoined by this court, quote, will continue to infringe the copyrights in the Star Trek copyrighted works. Just as they violate copyright law, they prepared an unauthorized derivative works of the Star Trek copyrighted works in the form of the Axnar works itself. They reproduced and copyrighted elements of the Star Trek copyrighted works within the Axnar works itself, distributing copies of the Axnar works which contained copyrighted elements of the Star Trek copyrighted works, and publicly performing the Axnar works which contained the copyrighted elements of the Star Trek copyrighted works, in specifics. Then the court finds the defendants have infringed the copyright in the Star Trek copyrighted works. Defendants have contributed to the infringement copyrights of the Star Trek copyrighted works. Defendants have vicariously infringed the copyrights for the Star Trek copyrighted works. And lastly, that the court entered a declaration that defendants' continued production of the Axnar motion picture constitutes that its infringement of the Star Trek copyrighted works. Regarding the last slide, in the case Paramount versus Axnar, there is indeed a lesson to be learned. And why fan art isn't pursued legally on a consistent basis is a really up in the air sort of deal. I refer to a copyright IP lawyer, Seth Polansky, on this matter, watching his podcast, listening onto a bunch of his interviews, and I did find a concluded fact collection. Enough is a matter of law. Enough of what kind of content you're copying is for a judge to decide in the end. It does depend on case law, because it might be different in that jurisdiction, but most is federal and not a state circuit. But what is an artist to do? We're not shaking your fists in the context of IP lawyers. You don't want them to get made into a horrible example. Eventually there will be an IP lawyer with an iron fist, since Disney and Marvel are really strict and out to get you. But companies spend billions of dollars for, example, Mickey Mouse to become a household name. Because of their investment in the industry, they have an interest in making sure that their IP is protected. But on the flip side, there's a point to diminish that return both from getting a PR black eye or honestly paying for a court case. Researching, it's about 20 grand just to start the ball rolling on something like that. And if you're flying under the radar, they're not going to care so much. Never engage in IP infringement if you don't really understand or know what you're doing. Don't advertise and make a ton of money off of it, as the powers that be will possibly grow interest in you, such as the Star Trek case. Raising $1 million as opposed to independent artists going to a comic convention, selling a few prints, making a few $100s, will go past the radar most of the time. It's just not cost effective. As to have big guys come after you, $20,000, $150,000 will take an artist's entire paycheck and pocket completely clean, as opposed to something bigger like Star Trek's case, where losing that much money is terrible, but it could have been way worse. It's realistic for a small artist to license something, keep everyone happy if the fees are reasonable, but that's not always feasible. But if you're in the gray area and wanting to be successful, it's hard to do without worry of legality. You don't want a target on your back, just waiting. Affordable license is a rare, special snowflake unicorn, according to Seth Polansky. DC and Hasbro being examples don't seek out suits with fan art creators. DC doesn't bring down independent artists because they have decided it's in their best interest to let it go business-wise. Comic book and movie fans are a dedicated community, and they want to embrace and live in the world their heroes do. That seemingly being impossible, they get work from a favorite artist at a con or commission off a site, gives them a unique piece of that world. Paid fan art's issues that could affect fair use with regards to the numerous legal questions that commissions and sales start shifting the purpose factor due to changing the use to a more commercial and for-profit one, as opposed to a non-profit site like Instagram where you can share your art freely without purpose. Prints of fan art and fan art businesses become more systematic, ongoing, and have a greater potential to affect the market than one-off commissions, shifting the purpose and effect it has. Most fan artists don't get so big that the big companies feel a need or threat to bring them down. They'll fall under the radar, and in the end it'll cost them more out of pocket to start a suit than they will get out of it, as average artists they take on they'll get relief from won't even have a third of that to return. That fan, rather than cease purchasing DC merchandise, will be drawn even further into the brand, buying the comics, other merch, seeing the movies 5 times, telling their friends, buying the DVDs, videos, and now streaming. Comic artists and freelancers that they are also benefit from being allowed to make some side cash when comic book companies like DC don't have commissions for them. Now, example. DC artist Gabriel Piccolo was a special case. For his casual Teen Titans, who are a DC title, he created unauthorized fan art. It got so popular with the public via Instagram and cons that DC hired him for his own official book series starring his version of the Titans. That they gain a powerful artist with a new outlet of established fans that are hungry for more of them, with his new personal iterations that have now become familiar and dear to his following, drawing new fans in. It's a win for everyone. Now, what to make of Comic Sans boundaries now? Personally, I think it's safe to say, mostly, that a publication this small would indeed fall under the radar. It's a simple, small, and digital publication meant to reach a small fan base, but in general be a love letter to fans and artists alike, whilst being respectful to the established media the pieces are derived from. This isn't foolproof, and I think making sure that this publication is labeled unauthorized and making sure that the fact is known. It'll be a huge help in claiming fair use in the sense that it is not commercially impacting the original works, majorly or culturally, and is in general very tasteful. Not to say that this isn't still a gray area. Fan art, fan fiction, fan films all have their piece, all have their say in legality, but regardless, it is still a case-by-case basis, and the law around it is ever growing. Thank you for listening.